April 7th, Dan Hill. Now, not the singer-songwriter who wrote, "Sometimes when we touch, the honesty's too much, and I have to close my eyes and hide." Who remembers that terrible song that's now stuck in your brain for the rest of the day? Anyway, I'm talking about Dan Hill, the director of strategic design for the Swedish government, and he's a top writer on climate change. And he wrote a Medium post entitled "An A/B Test on Our Way of Life." Now, what's an A/B test? An A/B test is something that in a science experiment, you might change one variable and see what the difference in the outcome is. In digital marketing, we use it to try to figure out what subject headers work in emails or which Facebook ad images might work better, right? And it's a way of comparing different things. And so a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Dave Snowden, who's one of the world's leading experts in managing complexity. And he talked about how the coronavirus is kind of an A/B test on our way of life.
We did a big podcast on complexity and COVID the other day. And one of the things I said in it, which I may learn to regret, is that COVID was God's gift to humanity. Because it's kind of like, so I'm a Catholic, all right? So this is kind of like it's a purgatory period, but you've got a chance of redemption. No? Because what we got is something, well, I think it will probably cull about 10% of the world's population. If you look at both direct and secondary effects over the next 2 years. And it will cause an economic meltdown. In fact, we're now at the point where we realize that money actually doesn't matter. That's actually quite significant. All this, there isn't enough money for this. Well, sorry, there is, right? So I think that gives us a chance to get our act together as a species, right? And I think there's a willingness to do that, which I haven't seen before, because global warming is going to be far more catastrophic than this. And the next pandemic might have a 6-week gestation period and take 80%. Coronavirus already has 16 variants within the last 6 months. And it's mutating fast. So I think it's a chance to get our act together.
Now, there's no way without this crisis would we have so clearly seen how our way of working and living is impacting the planet. There's a difference between theory and practice, and some people are willing to buy into theory, but others want to see for themselves. Now, we know that CO2 emissions have been climbing for a long time, and there have been drops with each major global event like the end of World War II and the last GFC. But the 2020 forecast of drop is actually the most significant we might have seen since they've been able to measure this shit. And much of that is due to cars being off the road and planes being out of the sky. And all of that is due to us being locked down at home. And so here's a photo of a friend of mine, Eric Kurzbard, who he took of the LA skyline before coronavirus. And here's a photo of another friend of mine from Facebook, Ed Lee, who posted a couple of weeks after the lockdown began. It's staggering. Here's a picture of the Himalayas from India, which you've never been able to see. And the same thing from China, which has been noted for horrible air pollution. If you've ever been there, you can barely see your hand in front of your face. And the water is apparently running clear in the canals in Venice. And so not only do we dump tons of pollution and carbon in the air from commuting, we lose almost $750 billion a year in lost productivity globally. And we spend almost $800 billion a year in rent for office workers. There's 150 million office workers in the US alone, 86% of who sit there in front of a computer all day, which is about 150 square feet per person. There's 20 billion square feet of office space, right? It's almost $1 trillion we spend on rent to house people sitting there working on computers. Now, there's a ton of research that's coming out that shows that less time in the office actually makes us more productive. There was a UK study that showed that we actually only work 3 hours a day when we're in the office anyway, from a productivity standpoint, because we spend all day, on smoke breaks and water cooler breaks and looking at Facebook and chatting with friends. There have been a couple of 4-day work week studies. One came out of an insurance company called Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand, where they had 240 employees, and they worked with local universities, and they found that there was lower stress, higher job satisfaction, and better work-life balance. And then Microsoft in Japan last year did a test with 2,300 office workers and found a 40% increase in sales per worker and a 23% reduction in energy usage by going to a 4-day work week. Now, There's this concept of a cyclical working strategy that's being promoted by a guy named Keith Wilson. Howdy, hey neighbor. Who's a professor at the Imperial College of Chemical Biology and Healthcare in London. Now, I'm sure that he says this with an air of authority and a great British accent, but he's basically published this concept of how we get back to work in the coronavirus pandemic, where we go to work for 4 days in the office, and then we work from home for 10 days to see if we've been exposed, because the 10 days covers most of the incubation period. And if we exhibit symptoms, we don't go back into the office. And so companies are looking at how are they going to change the way we work. Now, Google and Facebook first came out and said, we're going to extend work from home at least to the end of the year. And then JP Morgan and Amazon and Capital One and Microsoft and Zillow and all of these other companies basically jumped in. Rich Handler, who's the CEO of Jefferies and Company, which is an investment bank, said work and office are no longer inextricably linked. And then Jack Dorsey 2 days ago came out and quoted said, if our employees are in a role and situation that enables them to work from home and they want to continue to do so forever, we will make that happen. Now, there's this Paris Climate Agreement that the US signed on to, and then Trump basically gave notice saying they're pulling out of. Now, he said it's going to cost $3 trillion by 2040 if they stay in it. And then another study said it was going to cost $6 trillion if they pull out of it. So the reality is nobody has a fucking clue what any of this shit means. And so we do nothing and we're gridlocked. But then the A/B test comes in. And CFOs are looking at how much money they can save on office space. And HR professionals are looking at more happiness for employees and better productivity. And lawyers are looking at the liability of letting people come back to a workplace in the office and the potential lawsuits that happen if somebody gets sick and God forbid dies. And then managers saying, shit, I can recruit the best talent from around the globe. I don't have to stay in the shallow, talent pool in my own backyard. And so what's happened is the economy and the environment have always been at odds. And we finally got a point where there's alignment. And that's never happened before. Now, I spoke with Jay Maloney last week, who's been with KLM for 20 years. And now he heads up their XR initiatives. Check this out.
We have to do something with our environmental footprint. So what we're doing, we're looking together with our government's industries to see if we can actually use these technologies to decrease our environmental footprint, but at least still stay competitive. So I'm a manager of different people in different countries. And I have to keep in contact with these people. I have to attend various meetings and whatnot. And that means that I have to fly very, very often between Paris, between Valbonne, between Toulouse and all these places in Amsterdam. And this is not only killing for my own personal carbon footprint, it's also very expensive financially. You're talking about flying back and forth, but you're talking about hotel costs. You're talking about lost production. So, and I'm not the only one doing this. The whole company's doing this.
The whole world's doing it.
Yeah, the whole world's doing it. But if I keep it focused on where we are at the moment, we're talking financially, it's costing millions every year. But now, because the old way of working has been drastically taken away, the alternatives are really starting to come on board.
Now, if an airline that actually drives all of its revenue from flying people around the world is looking to VR to reduce the amount of travel that we have to endure, surely others that have bigger financial incentives to do it will be jumping all over it. And so the question is, can VR save the world? Not by itself, but it absolutely can help. Headsets are going to get lighter and more comfortable. Software applications are going to get better. User interactions are going to get more intuitive. And I'm going to keep spreading the word, and I want you guys to all do the same. So like and share this shit.